Fine, yeah. All right, good evening. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin Daf Chav Hey and Chav Vav Amud Aleph, starting on the second line of Chav Hey Amud Aleph and going down to the two dots on Chav Vav Amud Aleph, about 10 lines from the bottom at the two dots, a lot of ground to cover. Let's jump right in. Save Dinizunya, the elders of a particular city, Lo Asu Lepirke de Rav Chizda, they ditched on Rav Chizda's shiur. Amar Leila Rav Hamnuna, Rav Chizda says to Rav Hamnuna, Zil Tzinainhu, go over to them and Tzinainhu. What does that mean? Rashi's second line, Zil Tzinainhu, and more lamely, Sager V'Leishei Babayis, tell them to lock themselves in their own home. This is the language of, usually the word tznius is a positive word. Here it's being used in the negative word. So Azal, then Rav Hamnuna went over to these people. Amar Luhu, my time alo asu Rabbanon Lepirka. You guys ditched. What's the deal? So they said, Amrulay, they said, Amai Nesi, why should we bother showing up? We had asked a question from Rav Chizda. We had asked a shiur to Rav Chizda. They never answered us. We're done. We're not going to a shiur. He's not helping us anymore. Cancel culture. What about me? Have you ever asked me a question and I haven't answered you? What was your question? So Bomine, they asked a question in regards to Eved. Remember what we've been discussing. What are considered the parameters for a severance of the human body that enables an Eved Kanani to go free? They said Eved shesirsu rabo bebeitzim mahu. If there is an Eved where his Rav was misares him in regards to his beitzim, in regards to his testicles, what would be the dim? Do we say kamum shebegalui dami, that it's revealed because in theory that part of the body is external to the body, or perhaps because the beitzim are enclosed within the skin of the scrotum, so therefore there's nothing to talk about. Says the Gemara that Rav Hamnuna lo hava biyada, he didn't know the answer. Amru lo, all of these guys, these goons, they said to Ma Shimcha, by the way, what is your name after all? He said, Amar lahu Hamnuna. He said, my name is Hamnuna. So they gave a little bit of an elbow, and Amru le, they said to him, Lav Hamnuna ella Karnuna. What is Karnuna? Rashi says 6 lines down, Dibra Masel, Karnuna, Yoshev Kronos Ata, Below Baal Torah. You don't know what you're talking about. You're an Am Haaretz. Goodbye. Also, the Kamed Rav Chizda, and then Rav Hamnuna, with his upset demeanor, went in front of Rav Chizda, and he presented what the guy said back to him. Rav Chizda says back to Rav Hamnuna, Mas Nisa Ba'ominach. They were asking you for a basic Mishnah. You should have known it. That's not. The Mishnah says, there are 24 tips on the body, and they will not become tummy because of michya. What's michya? Rashi, 10 lines down, so what we see that this is a type of nega. Now the reason why it wouldn't become tummy is because when something is found in wrapping the whole tip of your finger, it's impossible to see all aspects of the nega at any one time. When you're looking at the front, you can't see the back. When you're looking straight on, you can't see the side. And therefore, when you can't see the whole nega, we're not going to learn the Mar Mekomos for this. Now, Rashi discusses this. When you can't see the whole nega, then it's not considered to be a nega. These are the types of limbs, the types of appendages where a person, if they were to have a nega there, they would not have tzaras. Says the Gemara, Roshe etzbos, yadayim v'raglayim, 10 fingers and 10 toes, v'roshe oznaim, the tips of your ears, v'rosh achot, and the tip of your nose, v'rosh gevia, the end of a person's genitalia, v'roshe dadim shebeisha, the end of a woman's breasts, Rabbi Yehuda Omer af beish, even the end of the male breast, the Tani Allah, in all of these cases, bekulam, in all of these cases, eved yotze bahem, that in all of these cases, it's considered to be the case that if you get injured in any of these areas, you go free. You go free. Any 24 of these locations, you go free. Rabbi Omer, af hasirus, even in regards to the sirus, the beitzim case that we started with, you'd also go free for that. Benazai Omer, af halashon, even if a person's tongue were to be injured, which was, both of these were left out. The case of sirus, beitzim was left out, and the case of lashon, the tongue was also left out. And we'll see at the very bottom of the Gemara, halacha l'maisa, if the tongue is considered an internal or an external organ. Sometimes it's seen, sometimes it's not. Omar Mar, let's analyze. First of the long lines, a little bit more than a third of the way down. Chav Hamid off the Gemara says, analyzing Shitas Rebbe. Rebbe said, Rebbe Omer Afa Sirus, even in regards to Sirus, if a Rav does some type of damage to the beitzim of the Eved, he goes free. Sirus demai. What is the damage that he's done? Says the Gemara, Sirus to Gid, if we're talking about the Aver itself, that can't be. Because the Brisa, Hainu Gavia, that was already included in the Brisa of the 24. So the Sirus can't be that. Elalav, it must be Sirus debates him. And therefore, Sirus debates him answers our question from the top of the page. And that is why Rav Chizda said to Rav Hamnuna, this is a Mishnah. That's Shitas Rebbe. Rebbe is of the opinion that when there's Sirus, and that's talking about Beitzim, therefore that's considered enough damage to send an Eved Kanani out of his servitude. Let's analyze this Shita still more second of the wide lines. Rebbe Omer Afa Sirus, Vahacha, the Rebbe Lashon Lo. Does Rebbe not agree to the Shita of Ben Azai? Rebbe spoke about Sirus. The Brisa spoke about 24. Which excluded Beitzim, it excluded Lashon. So Rebbe then added in Beitzim and seemingly didn't add in Lashon. So says the Gemara, how can he leave out Lashon? After all, let's say you have a person who's Tamei Meis and there's Mechatas and he's been sprinkled on his mouth, Rebbe Omer Hiza. That is considered to be Hazaya, which means that this is considered to be a part of your body that is subject to halachic principles of the outside of the body. So therefore, how can you say that Rebbe would not agree? That Rebbe himself said Hiza, and after all, that he says that, therefore it's a stira. We're talking about on the tongue, in which case we have a stira with Rebbe, because Rebbe seemed to omit lashon, the damage of a person's tongue, from the damages that would free an Eved Kanani. And over here, he seems to include a tongue as it relates to Hazah. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not correct. Halfway down, we're not talking about your tongue. When the Bryce over here talks about Shehiza Hazah al Piv, is talking about al Svasav on his lips. Says the Gemara, al Svasav Pshita. Everyone agrees on your lips that that's considered to be external to the body. I could understand the machlokes of the tongue. Sometimes we see the tongue, sometimes we don't. But pashut that the lips are on the outside. Says the Gemara, that's really true in some ways, but what if a person purses their lips very tightly, and therefore the parts of the lips that are touching are no longer visible? You can't do that to your 10 fingers. What are you going to hide them in your hand? I can still see my fingertips if they're in. I just have to look at them. But if a person constantly purses their lips, there's a part of their lips that aren't seen. So perhaps we would have said that the mehazah doesn't work there, kamash malan, that the mehazah does work there, and therefore there's no raya one way or the other for Rebbe in regards to Lashono. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second, Vatanya, we have another brisa that says al Lashono, that Hazah does work on the Lashon. So therefore, kasha against Rebbe, because Rebbe seemed to exclude it. And furthermore, Tanya, we have a brisa that speaks about a Bechor, and says the Gemara that a Bechor is no longer a Bechor when there's a mum of Vishanitel Rov HaLashon, when most of the tongue is removed. What does Rebbe say? Rabbi Omer Rov HaMedaber B'Lashono. Most of the parts of the tongue where speech takes place. So therefore, we see a double question against Rebbe. It seems to be that he omitted Lashon from his count. And it seems that according to Rebbe, from the first presentation of Rebbe, it seems to be that if the tongue of an Eved Kanani was cut, he would not go free. Here we have Kasha, says the Gemara, you're right. 2/3 of the way down, 8 lines into the wide lines. Of course, he holds of Sirus, but he even holds of Lashon. I should say the other way. He holds of Lashon, and he even holds of Sirus. Says the Gemara, Ben Azai Omar Lashon Aval Sirus Lo. So says the Gemara, the flow of our Gemara is actually out of order. Umay Af, what does it mean, Af? Even. The language is odd, because if you're saying Af Hasirus for Rebbe, if you look at the last of the short lines, Rebbe said Af Hasirus, but I thought the Lashon was first and then Af Hasirus was on the Lashon. You're out of order. Says the Gemara, Akamaisa, no. What we're talking about is on the 24. He's adding on to the 24. Ihachi, if that's the case, Nekadma de Ben Azai Beresha, we should have included the Brisa first, then Ben Azai, who only includes Lashon and not Sirus, and then Rebbe, who includes both Sirus and Lashon. That would have been a smoother flow. Says the Gemara, you're right logically, and that should have been how the Mishnah was written. The problem is that's not how the time of information evolved. Tana, the person who put together this particular Mishnah, Shema l'de Rebbe v'kava'a. He had already heard of the Shita of Rebbe, and he wrote down Rebbe Shita. And then Rishama l'de Ben Azai b'tani. He wrote Ben Azai afterwards, because that's when he heard his name. That's when he heard his Shita. So therefore, you're right, it's out of order, but we're going to keep it this way because of a very important principle, Mishnah lo zaza mimekoma, that we are not going to edit a Mishnah in this regard. All right. So all of this is Sugya 1. The Maisa, according to Shitas Rebbe, we were discussing whether the Lashon, the cutting of the tongue of an Eved Kanani, if it would generate freedom for that Eved. According to Rebbe, it seemed like he didn't say it. Now we know for sure that he did. And therefore, There are 3 levels, seemingly, of those actions that will create the freedom. Obviously, Shein Vayin is in the Psukim. We have the Bryce of the 24. Ben Azai adds Sirus, and Rebbe adds Sirus and Lashon. Amar Ula, 2/3 of the way down. Akol Modim B'Lashon. Everyone agrees in regards to the tongue in Yituma, the Galu Huetzel Sheretz, that if a tongue is contacted by a sheretz, that's considered to be outside of the body, and therefore he'll become tamei. My time, because I share yigabo. In regards to a sheretz, the parameter of the Torah is that there should be contact, Rachmana, just something that touches. The high nami bar negia. We're not talking about an inner organ, right? Like where your spleen. Okay, pasha, the animal can't touch that, but your tongue, which is sometimes out of the body and sometimes in, that can become subject to the tumah of a sheretz. And the inyan tefillah, there's also no machlokes. That's kitamun dami. That's the inyan tefillah. Your tongue, as it relates to tefillah, that's considered to be hidden. My time. Your basar, the flesh of your body, the skin is external to your body. Your tongue lives inside your mouth. Afal that sometimes it's in your mouth and sometimes it's out of your mouth. But Lamai says it relates to the mikvah. We don't need to get water of the mikvah touching your tongue. I wouldn't recommend it anyways. What?
Well, you don't open your mouth with your teeth?
You're not supposed to get mikvah water in your mouth. You're not required and you're not supposed to. Nor would I recommend. You learn something new every day. But if there's ever a puddle not to drink from, it's mikvah water. So you do not, your mouth should be open, but with air, you keep the water at bay. You should not allow water into your mouth. And we'll discuss at the bottom of the page the halachic aspects of whether
should be open.
You can keep your mouth open, but if you keep enough air in your mouth and half blow out, then the water won't go in. We'll discuss it. We'll discuss it. I don't blame you, but we'll discuss at the bottom of the page certain aspects of this that are a little bit more halachic. So the reason why the linyan tefillah, it's kitamun, why that's considered to be hidden, is because it's basar, and basar is me'avroi, av kol me'avroi. The only time we have a machlokes in regards to hazah. Lo nechleku, the Rabbanon and Rebbe, they only argue in regards to hazah, in regards to the sprinkling of the mechatas. What's the argument? Rebbe medama le'letuma. Rebbe compares it to tuma, just like tuma of the sheretz is the real deal. It's considered external. So to by hazah, it's considered like the real deal. V'Rabbanan medamu le'tefillah. The rabbis say that hazah is not like tuma. Hazah is like tefillah, and just like tefillah is only that which is me'avroi on the outside. Tongue is inside. This is outside. The tarvaihu b'hai krakemiflage. This is fascinating. You've seen probably all of these memes and jokes about putting the comma in the wrong place. Right? So that's one of these examples. We don't know how to read the pasuk in Chumash. The pasuk reads v'hizah tahor ala tamei v'gomer, and I'll read the whole pasuk inside so we have some context. If you have the pasuk on the side, it's helpful. The pasuk says v'hizah tahor ala tamei bayom hashlishi b'yom hashvi'i, and then the next word is v'chit'o. Is v'chit'o with the first part, and you became pure, or is v'chit'o with the second part, v'chit'o bayom hashvi. We don't know if it's a bayom hashvi v'chit'o, or v'chit'o bayom hashvi v'chibes begadav rachatz b'mayim v'taher mi ba'erev. 8 lines from the bottom, the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Chaf Hey Amud Aleph, Rabbi Savar v'hizah hatahor ala tamei bayom hashishi u'bayom hashvi'i v'chit'o. And v'chit'o in this case means to become tahor, and it's talking about tuma in that part of the pasuk. So therefore, Rebbe says that when it comes to the tahara of the hazah, which is v'chit'o, it's in the same category as tuma, which is therefore that the tongue is considered to be external as it relates to tuma, so it's external as it relates to hazah. Rabbanon Savre, the rabbis hold that the pasuk of v'chit'o, the word v'chit'o is with the second half of the pasuk, namely. In this half of the pasuk, the word v'chito is talking about the same part of the pasuk that's talking about v'rachatz b'mayim. So therefore, the Rabbanon see an equivalence between v'chito, which means you become tahor from the world of mechatas, and it says v'rachatz b'mayim, which is talking about mikvah. So therefore, we see that tefillah is in the same category of v'chito, and therefore by tefillah, since the tongue is not me'avroi, it's not outside, it's inside. So therefore, the din is that it should not go on your tongue. So says the Gemara, V'Rabbanan Nami, V'Rabbanan Nami, why were you not nidmei l'tuma? Why didn't you say like Rebbe that we should compare v'chita'o to tuma? They said because tara mitara havalei l'melach. We're talking about tara from mechatas, and the second half of the pasuk is talking about v'rachatz b'saro b'mayim, which is also talking about tara. We should stay me'inyan linyan ba'osunyan. Stay on the topic. Why are you changing topics? Just it makes more sense this way. I have a Rebbe nidmei l'tefila. Why doesn't Rebbe hold like the Rabbanon? And make a comparison between hazah and the world of tefillah, says the Gemara, because if you look in the pasuk, it says 2 lines above us. V'chito b'yom hashvi v'chibes begadav v'rachatz b'mayim. V'chibetz begadav is talking about laundering your clothes and is really a separation from the word v'chito and v'rachatz b'mayim. Rabbi can't handle the bifurcation, and he says, therefore, it doesn't work that way, even though I would agree with you in principle, we should say that everything is talking about Tara, but here we can't do that because the pasuk is interrupted by v'chibes begadav. Asks the Gemara 5 lines from the bottom. The Sava Rebbe Leinian Tefillah Ketamudami. Is it correct that Rebbe holds in regards to Tefillah? We said it was a Davar Pasha 10 lines ago that everyone agrees in regards to Tefillah that it's Ketamudami. Says the Gemara. Amar Ravin, Amar Rav Ada, Amar Rav Yitzchak. Ma'aseh b'shivcha shel beis Rebbe. The maidservant of Rebbe, Shatavla, she went to the mikvah, Va'alsa, and she got out of the mikvah, V'nimsa etzem bein shina, and she found that there was a bone inside her teeth, a little fish bone, something along those lines. V'tzricha Rebbe, b'tvila cheres. What did Rebbe say? Go back to the mikvah, take the bone out, go back to the mikvah. What do we see from here? The Rebbe is concerned about the mouth. Forget about the tongue specifically, but even that, anything which is in the mouth. We wanted to say, Havamina, that everything by tefillah, the tongue is always considered to be an internal part of the body and not relevant to tefillah. So then why did Rebbe send her to the mikvah? Elamai, it must be that Rebbe holds that the inside of the mouth is relevant for mikvah. So says the Gemara, it's in fact correct that we don't need to have water that is brought into the mouth during the mikvah, but makom haroi lavo b'mayim bo'inan, we need it to be a space that water could enter, kiderib zera. Meaning, you're right, water from the mikvah does not and should not go in your mouth. But in theory, had it gone in your mouth, it would have to be able to access all of the natural parts of your body. And therefore, says the Gemara, kiderib zera. To amar rib zera kol haroi lebila ein bila me'akeves bo, what this is talking about is a korban mincha. Let's say that the dish that the flour and water is in is a dish that's so difficult to mix it that it's just not feasible or reasonable that the water will get in touch with all of the flour. So in that case, that's a big problem. If it's eino ra'ui labila, it's not even possible for everything to mix because of the shape or size of the pot or the ratios of flour to water, so then bila me'akeves. Even though if in theory the ratio of water to flour in the pot was perfect, if there was still some dry flour, no problem. But in theory, it has to be done. So therefore, over here too, when one person goes to the mikvah, their mouth is considered to be tamun. Their mouth is considered to be a part of the mikvah that does not require water. One should not get mikvah water in their mouth. However, you should not be wearing your Invisaligns. You should not be wearing rubber bands if you have braces. These are shilas and poskim in regards specifically to women going to the mikvah. The poskim actually discuss when a woman goes to the mikvah, should she use waxed floss to floss her teeth, or should she not use waxed floss? So one of the concerns about waxed floss is that the wax stays on your teeth after you floss. That could generate a hefsek. And afal pi that we don't need the water to go into her mouth, but it has to be ra'ui for water to go into her mouth. Another example of this is a well-known din that on the day that a woman goes to the mikvah, she should not be eating meat, and we extend it to chicken. Meat is very stringy, the muscle's very stringy, and it's not uncommon. We've all had this happen. That's why they hand out toothpicks at restaurants, that you get a little bit of piece of meat stuck between your teeth. The only override is Shabbos and Yontiv, that a woman can, in fact, eat meat and chicken l'chavod Shabbos and l'chavod Yontif. She just has to be careful to remove that chicken on Shabbos and Yontif before she goes to the mikvah. This is all this din, that it's makom haroi lavo bo b'mayim bo'inan. We need it to be that had it been that water was in a person's mouth when they go to the mikvah, we need it to then be that the water could access if there's a bone in between the teeth, if there is meat between the teeth, v'chule, that does not count. Going back to our starting discussion about the conversation between the rebellious student who didn't go to Rav Chizda's shiur and the discussion about the beitzim, how all of that works out. This is in fact a machlokas tanoim, ki tanoi chav hey amid beis on the top of the page. This is a pasuk that speaks about male genitalia if they are squashed, crushed, torn, or severed. No terminologies that anyone would enjoy. Kulan bebeitzim divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says we're talking about beitzim only testicles, not the actual gid. Asks the Gemara, but beitzim v'lo begid, are you only talking about beitzim? What about the anatomy itself? Zog the Gemara, elakulan af bebeitzim. In all of these cases, these same forms of damage of malch, kasus, nasuk, and charus, all of them apply both to the beitzim and to the gid. No difference between them. Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov, no, kulan begid. The opposite. We're only talking about the gid. We're not talking about the beitzim. In other words, damages to the beitzim would not cause for the freedom of the Ebed, only damage to the Gid. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Ma'uch v'chasus af bebeitzim. Rabbi Yossi says, Ma'uch v'chasus, those are the first two, that's if they're squashed or crushed, that's af bebeitzim. Nasuk v'charus, but those latter two ones of being torn or severed, those are begid in bebeitzim lo, those only apply to the Gid, to the anatomy itself, and not to the scrotum, not to the beitzim that are in the scrotum. Okay, back to kinyonim. Mishnah says on Chav Hey Amid Beis, Behema Gasa Niknes B'Mesira. We are able to be kone a big animal, a cow, a bull, whatever, a bison. That's done b'Mesira. You hand over the reins. That's what Rashi says. If you take a look at Rashi, 10 lines down at the new Mishnah, Ba'aleha Moser Nosal Lokech Be'afsar O B'Saira. You hand over the reins or you hand over the hair. Continuing in the Mishnah, V'Hadaka, small animals Be'Hagba, you have to pick them up. Divi Reb Meir, Reb Elazar, Divi Reb Meir, Reb Elazar. V'Chachamim Omrim Beis that Behema Daka Niknes B'Mashicha. Okay, you're allowed to be the machlokes tanaim. Are you niknes a behema daka, a small one, like Rav Meir says behag? I have to pick up the sheep, or can I even do mishicha where I pull the animal towards me? Mishnah opens with a unique shita that's not found in our Mishnah. Darash Rav beKimchunya. Rav was the guest speaker, scholar in residence in Kimchunya. He was speaking and he said, behema gasa niknes b'mishicha. Even a behema gasa, which we said is only niknes b'misira. That was the sheet at the beginning, the first sheet of our Mishnah. Over here we see that it's niknes b'mashicha even by pulling the animal. So it says the Gemara, Ashkachinu Shmuel Talmidei Rav. There were some students of Shmuel who were chaperoning the students of Rav after they heard Rav's odd psak. It's against the Mishnah. Amar Luhumi, Amar Rav behema gasa niknes b'mashicha v'anan b'masira t'nan. The Rav nami b'masira Amar. How can you say that a behema gasa can be niknes b'mashicha? That's not what it says. It's only b'masira. You have to hand over the reins. It's not b'mashicha dafka. Hadar Beimei Hahi, did Rav reject his own shita that it's really b'masira to say that it's even b'mashicha? Says the Gemara, no. Rav had his own shita. Rav held Huda Omar Ki Haitana, the Brisa writes to Tanya v'chacham Omrim Zu v'zu niknes b'mashicha. Really, there is a shita in the Tanaim. That's the Tanakama in this Brisa. 7 lines from the bottom of the page, 2/3 of the way down on Chav Hey Amid Beis, that a behema gasa, a large animal, can be niknes both. A behema gasa and a behema daka can be niknes with mashicha. Reb Shimon Omer, zu v'zu behagba. We're going to have a very practical problem in a moment, and that is that Reb Shimon's of the opinion that in regards to an animal that's a behema gasa and a behema daka, both of them can be picked up. Says the Gemara, you'll please excuse me, Maskif Rav Yosef Elameata peel the Reb Shimon b'maya ikne. Last I checked, elephants are very, very large. If you're of the opinion that an animal that's a behema gasa needs to be picked up in order to be nikneh, behatzlacha. What are you going to do? You come up with a pulley system, fine. But Lamaisa, that or the basic kinyan is done by hagva. And you can't pick up a baby elephant. You certainly can't pick up an adult one. They weigh tons, many tons. Amar le Abaye, perhaps it's bechalipin. Perhaps what Reb Shimon means is that you're right, we're not picking up the animal, but we're doing chalipin, which is of course a replacement kinyan. Inami besocheres mekomo. Perhaps we'll rent out the place where the animal is standing. Rabbi Zera Omer maybe arba kelim umanichan tachas ragla. We take 4 kelim, put 1 under each of his feet, and that's the kinyan. Asks the Gemara on this recommendation of Rabbi Zera, shamas mina kelev shelokech b'rshus mocher kana lokech. If you have the kalim of the buyer in the house of the seller, how can you say that that works? We have already discussed this sugya many blot ago, maybe a besechta ago. Where was this? We saw this.
Definitely saw this in Git.
Yeah, but it's not quoted here on the side. Oh, it's quoted outside the lines here. Git 9 ches. Yeah. So over here in the side here it says Baba Mitzia Samach Zayin Amid Beis Baba Basar Pehamid Beis Zayin Zayin Avodah Zara Ayin Aleph Amid Beis, and then afterwards it adds in Git 9 ches. Really?
But I remember it.
That's one Oz V'Hadar that you appreciate. I remember it too. I would never have remembered where. But here the Gemara says you want to bring in the Lokeach is bringing his own kalim into the Rishus of the Mocher, the seller of the elephant. That's not going to work. Says the Gemara. And we're not talking about the property of the Mocher. We're talking about Besimta in some type of alleyway. Rashi says Besimta Zavis Shehi Eitzel Rishus Harabim Vein Lo Rishus Harabim Lo Rishus Hayachid. We had a Simta in Maseches Erevin back in the day, and it will be found elsewhere in Shas as well. Lamaisa, that does work. The Gemara says that we're allowed to bring in the kalim of the lokeach of the buyer into a Simta, which is what's that zone between the two Koreas, the non-military zone. It has no status. It's not this and it's not that. What?
No flight.
Demilitarized.
Demilitarize them. That's the word I was looking for. All right, there you go. Okay, so there the Gemara says that actually works. Inami, turning to the top of Chavavam and Aleph, heading to the end of the day, we're going to be learning just a little bit more. Inami bechavile zemuros, if you are able to set up a scenario where you can put down enough vegetation, enough straw, whatever the case may be, that the animal, when it climbs up 3 tvachim, when it climbs up enough, that's considered to be hagbah. It's a cheap shot, but it works. But why is that considered hagbah? What are you doing? The fact that you made it walk onto higher ground, that's enough. Because you added things to the ground, you added blocks. You ever been to the circus where the elephant stands on a brick? Okay, those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. If you can make the elephant do that, that's considered Reb Shimon's version of hagbah with a peel with an elephant.
Look in Rashi, you'll see you probably spent a month trying to understand this. You set it up, it's hagbah, there's lavud.
Umolichan alem the hagbah shlosha tvachim hagbah he the nafkalei mitoras lavu has to be above 3 tvachim. Has to be above.
You got him there when he's off the ground, I guess.
He's off the ground now.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, there's just no lavud. Okay, simple. All right, next mission on the top of Chavav and Aleph. Let's jump right in. This I have a mental block for some of these types of sugyas, so I did learn it, and I think I understand it, but I'm just telling you my brain is not good with these nechasim sheish lamachrayis sugyas. Nechasim sheish lamachrayis is typically referred to this way, and it talks about karka. It's properties that have liens on them. And says the Gemara, these kinds of properties are niknan v'kesef u'bishtar v'chazaka. We can be kona these properties with money, with a document, and with a chazaka. She'ein lehen achrayis. If we're talking about things that have no lien on them, typically this is an assumption of metaltalin. Ein niknan ela b'mashicha. These kinyanim are only done through mashicha by pulling them towards you. Nechasim she'ein lemachrayis niknim in nechasim sheish lemachrayis. If you have things that have no achrayis, if you have metaltalin, they can be niknes with karka b'kesef u'bishtar v'chazaka. They can tag along with the transaction. Meaning if you have, I don't know, some garden tools in your shed, and I want to buy your shed, so I can buy your shed and chapa rein with the form of kinyan, with kesef, shtar, and chazaka, all the tools will then be included. But on their own, they cannot use kesef, shtar, and chazaka. It can only be done by mashicha. And under certain circumstances, when you have things that are metaltalin, you can then bring about a shvua lishava alein when there's a challenge between these two things. When there's a challenge with the metaltalin, you can bring about a neder through that which is yesh nachras, through the properties that have liens. That last piece of the Mishnah is more complicated. We'll analyze it, but not today. The Gemara says, "Bekesef minol," and how do we know that in regards to karka you can make a transaction with money? Amar Chizki, Amar Kras, Seldos bekesef yiknu. Very clear pasuk. You're allowed to buy fields with money. Ay be'ema adi ikashtar. Perhaps we should say that you need two things, not just kesef, but also shtar. So it says the Gemara, Dechsiv, after all, doesn't it say v'chasov b'sefer v'chasom? Should be written in the book and signed. Says the Gemara, iksiv yiknu basov. If the word yiknu is written at the end of the pasuk, kidika amris, I would agree with you that you need both. But hashta dechsiv yiknu only by money me'ikara. Therefore, kesef kani, money is allowed to make a transaction by a karka. The shtar, and shtar is raya be'almahu. Okay. That means that if a shtar is being used on top of kesef, the shtar is nothing more than a receipt. It's nothing more than a raya l'davar. It's not leikuva. It's not deoraisa. It's just a proof. Rav says, Lo shana ela b'makom shein kosvin es hashtar. That's only true in a place where nobody writes stars. Ava b'makom shekosvin es hashtar lo kana. But in a place where it's the minhag makom that everybody writes a star, even with money, then you have to write the star. Vi parish. However, if you want to be explicit and make a deal, then the seller and the buyer can agree to that explicit rule, and then you're all fine and good. Ki had the Rabbi Idi bar Avin. In the following case, Kizov in Ara, when land was sold, Omar, he used to say, if I want, I can make this transaction with money. If I want, I can make the transaction with a star. And what was he really saying? When he said, and we are a third of the way down, and we'll be heading until 10 lines to the bottom of the page, when he said that I'm talking about a transaction with money, that's because that once I make that transaction with you, you're not allowed to go back. If I want to make a deal with you with a star, there I have the upper hand. I'm allowed to go back in regards to a star. So basically, you're allowed to be mefarish what you want the conditions to be, and then all is well and good. Says the Gemara, and how do we know that a star? And I know we were just talking about a star. We were talking about a star on top of kesef. Now we're talking about a star by itself. What about a star? How do we know that a star works by itself? And Nolan says the Gemara halfway down on Chavav Amar Aleph, the pasuk that we saw above, you can't say that because that when we were talking about that pasuk, that was in conjunction with kesef. Under those circumstances, a star was specifically brought as a raya and not as an actual transaction. Ella, you're right. The Gemara says, Mehacha, the pasuk says, Vo'akacha sefer hamikne, and therefore we see that a transaction works with star alone. Amar Shmuel lo shanu ela b'shtar matana. This only is talking about with a star matana. But in regards to mecher, if you're talking about money if you're talking about a star as it relates to matana, good to go. If you're talking about a star as it relates to mecher, that's really not true. We actually still need money. Says the Gemara, Masiv Rav Hamnuna b'shtar ketzad. What are you talking about? We have a brisa. Rav Hamnuna quotes a brisa. Kasav lo al haniyar o al acheres. If a person writes a star on a piece of paper or on pottery, afa pi she'ein bain shava pruta, even though that which you're writing on, the laser paper, is not the fancy paper, it's not worth a shava pruta. So says the Gemara, if we say sadi mechur lach and sadi nesuna lach, hareze mechur nesuna, you're good to go, seemingly without kesef. So therefore, how can you, Shmuel, say that lo shanu ela b'shtar matana? That's not true. It seems to be even with shtar mecher, that as long as you only have a star, that should work even without money. So if that's the case, what's Shmuel talking about? Says the Gemara, Rav Hamnuna, who asked the question, answered it. When is Shmuel right? That is only when is the brisa right? That's only b'mocher sadeh mipnei roasa, when the field is being sold because of its poor quality, then a star is sufficient. If you wanted to request to give it over as a matana, that also works. If that's true that we're talking about this case of matana, like Rav Ashi says, v'lama kasav lo lashon mecher, why is it that you're saying it's lashon mecher? Kedei liyapos es kocha, because that strengthens his claim to use the language of mecher, afalpi, that it's matana. It does make his claim a little bit stronger. We're going to stop right here, uvechazaka, and we'll pick up again in Mirza Hashem on Shabbos. I don't know what time Daf Yomi is. Did you check yet? An hour before Mincha. Wishing you all a beautiful night.